Okay, so this problem consists of the time weighted no, not time weighted, dollar weighted interest rate of return formula. It's pretty obvious. Interest earned, always find at the top, always starts with the initial amount and then cash flows thereafter, depending on deposits or withdrawals. And so they're asking here, determine which of the following conditions produces I closest to the annual effective yield rate. Okay, we know how to find interest. What really happens in the denominator, right? We always start with like initial cash outlay, and then thereafter, depending on whether it's a deposit or withdrawals, for example, plus T. Then we always multiply that deposit by the amount of years that have not elapsed yet, right? That's why it's denoted 1 minus T. For example, if you have a cash flow on July, that means 6 months have passed. So then we would put 6 months left here. That's why it says it's denoted 1 minus T something to find what's happening here. And then we always multiply it by an interest rate, right? And we keep on going whenever until there are no deposits or withdrawals left, right? So now they're saying determine which of the following conditions produces I closest to the annual effective yield rate, right? So they give us all of these sorts of things. What I've noticed here is that they're talking about the annual effective yield rate that we usually multiply to each deposit or withdrawal, right? So if we want to find the condition that produces I, which is closest to the annual yield rate that we're utilizing in the denominator, then we got to assume that the annual effective yield rate has to be the whatever we are multiplying by the annual effective yield rate that we're given for this denominator has to be relatively small in order for what we're computing this fraction as a whole to be closest to I. So let's look at all of the choices. So for E, when the timing of cash flows is uniform throughout the year. Okay, well, timing of cash flows. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And the cash flows all have the same sign. The cash flows have all the same sign. I don't think the sign of the cash flows could play a significant matter in producing I closest to the annual effective yield rate that we have. So I think C would be out. And each cash flow is large relative to I. Well, if each cash flow is large relative to the amount of interest earned during the year, I'd say that cash flow. Well, if each cash flow is large relative to I, then wouldn't it mean that we would produce a higher amount in relation to multiplying each cash flow to I? And wouldn't this create a bigger fraction to compute as this I? So no, I think C is out. So the next one is when each cash flow is large relative to F. Again, I feel like this would make a huge fraction An interest earned could relatively be large or small, but when each cash flow is large relative to F, I feel like it would play a part in not making our annual effective yield rate closest to I. So B is out. What else? Then it says when each cash flow is small relative to F. This would make better sense, right? Because if we make each cash flow large relative to F, it's not going to be as small when comparing it to the I that we're computing. And that is what the question is asking, something that is small, right? So A could be kept when the timing of cash flows is uniform throughout the year. So we kind of get the grasp of this question and we realize that it's testing us on more of like the quantity, whether it's small or large. So I think that timing, especially for D sign, I feel like these answers are pretty fishy because they're kind of tricking us into mentioning concepts that are really unrelated and they're depending on us to get rid of answers that are not as significant as the point in the question that they're talking about. Because when we're asking for conditions that produce I closest to the annual effective yield rate, we don't want I to be far off. We want it to be close to the rate that we're using, right? So if we were to multiply I by large cash flows relative to F or I, we're not even so sure if F or I are big, small, whatever. They're just mentioning how large relative to F or I are and computing it. We should get rid of these just so for the sake of making sure that at our annual effective yield rate is closest to the I that we're going to measure up to when we solve this whole equation, right? So I'd say that A is the best answer.